All right, we are on Ayin Bays, Amud Bays, 72b, towards the bottom, about 5 lines up from the bottom. We'll finish off this last little bit and then enter our new Mishnah. Amar Mar Zutra, breder of Nachman, Mar Zutra, the son of Rav Nachman, said, Kanishkinin Shari, that if you've got this sort of a Kanishkinin is a pot that has multiple straws in all different places. And a Jew would be drinking from one of them and a non-Jew would be drinking from the next one. No, they're all one. It's all one. So the issue is, it's permissible. V'hani mili, now that's as long as the Kodam Pasuk Yisrael, that's as long as the Jew stops drinking first, right? Because whatever the non-Jew drinks up, he's got still in his straw, doesn't mix back into the rest of the container. So if the Jew stops first, then you're okay. Aval kodam pasak ove kochavim lo. But if the non-Jew stops first, then it'll go back down the straw, remix it, and then you've got a yayin nesach problem. Backwash. Right? Backwash. That's exactly the word I was thinking of when I read it. So, Rabbi bar Rav Huna ikla lebe Reish Galusa. Rabbi bar Rav Huna went to the house of the Reish Galusa. Sharlahu lemishta bekanishkinin. And he said it's okay to drink from the Kanishkinin. Now, in the context of our Gemara, it sounds like they permitted them to drink even with non-Jews. There are other potential problems with the Kanishkinin, and that is that it was a very festive sort of a thing, right? You got this big wine and everybody taking the sip. They had potential that they made a rule after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash that people wouldn't get involved in things that are too happy and joyous. So potentially that would be the problem. But many Mefarshim understand our Gemara to say that he even permitted them even to have a non-Jew drinking with it. And we're not worried about the fact that the non-Jew might stop drinking first. Eka de Omri, and there are those who say that Rabbi bar Rav Huna gufei ishti bekanishkinin, and some said even Rabbi bar Rav Huna himself drank from the kanishkinin. Right? Tosfos finds that shocking. Right? That's why he says that this issue can't be about the non-Jew because you're so close to a prohibition of yayin nesach. How would he get himself into that difficult situation? So he suggests that the issue that they only permitted it with Jews, right? That's how he learns this, and therefore it was the issue of the Kanishkinin. We're just mentioning, as long as we're talking about the Kanishkinin, that there's also the issue of the celebratory aspect post Beis Hamikdash destruction era, and Rabbi bar Rav Huna permitted drinking from it, and he drank from it himself with other Jews, not with non-Jews. That's what Tosfos says.
Right. But Tinuk Shinishbat is not in it. Like we haven't seen that in the Gemara. It's interesting because you see it's always, as long as it's a Jew, even if it's a Jew who's not
that as long as he's not, we had the issue of whether he's a idol worshiper that could present problems.
Right.
Next Mishnah, Yayin Nesach Aser, the Oser Bekolshu. Now we get into mixtures. One of Brian, your favorite things, right? Mixtures. So if I've got Yayin Nesach, it is prohibited. The Oser Bekolshu, and when it comes in and mixes with other Yayin, with other wine, then since it's min bimino, since it is the same type, so it prohibits all the wine in the smallest quantity, right? The entire thing becomes prohibited. Yayin b'mayim, however, if you've got wine and water, b'mayim b'kolshehu, so, b'kolshehu, yayin b'yayin, umayim b'mayim b'kolshehu. So wine into wine and water, the smallest amount, right? They're the same type. Now, water isn't a yayin nesach problem, right? But non-Jews can make anything idolatrous, right? They could say that we're serving. So if they consecrate the water for idolatrous purpose, then it would be prohibited. And if it mixes with other water, then the entire water could be prohibited. However, yayin b'mayim, umayim b'yayin, if you've got wine into water and water into wine, b'no sein tam, it has to give a flavor, right? And so zeh haklal, here's our rule. Min b'mino b'mashu, if it's the same type, then the smallest amount is going to prohibit it. V'shalo b'mino, and if it's not of the same type, b'no sein tam, so then it has to give a flavor. Now, that sounds like the exact same thing as we said at the beginning, so we're going to wonder whenever the Mishnah says there's a general rule, it comes to include a case that's not in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah mentions yayin nesach. There has to be something else additionally that this mixture rule of liquids applies to. Okay, so says the Gemara. Kiyaser Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Dimi came and he said the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Hama'ara yayin nesach mechavis lebor. Afilu kol yom kulo. He says, if you've got yayin nesach, right, and you've got a big cistern, right, you've got your big pit in the ground, right, and that's where all your wine is contained, and you've got a barrel, right, and you're pouring out from the barrel into here. So he says you could pour from there all day long, and rishon bottle. The permitted stuff, this is yayin nesach, so this will be this, and this will be okay. This drop of yayin nesach falls into here, and it's permissible. Now, Rabbi Yochanan does not sound like he agrees with the very basic understanding of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says even the smallest quantity of yayin nesach is going to ruin the whole thing.
Like if we work around Thursday.
Sorry?
Similar to this on Thursday.
Right. And so he's not going to agree with that. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. He says that as long as you start pouring from the chalvisir, you have such a small amount of yayin nesach pouring into the permitted is nullifying the prohibited, and it becomes mutter. Okay? So, afilu kol it's the rishon batal. The beginning is each one is nullified. Okay, so and so he's going to interpret. Now the question is, and Yehuda's exactly right. We had discussed that I think it was Rav Dimi back before. And we're going to see it's the same Rav Dimi now. That he's explaining our Mishnah. The only way to really nullify, you need a larger quantity, right? So therefore, the larger he says that the wine, when the Mishnah says that if it falls in, it needs to be a all at once, right? The whole thing has to fall in at once in order to prohibit it. Okay, so now, Tanan, but our Mishnah says not like this. Our Mishnah says yayin nesach aser ve'oser b'kolshu. Yayin nesach is prohibited, and in the smallest quantity. So my love de kanafil isura legav hetera. Isn't our Mishnah talking about where the prohibited falls into the permitted? And he says, lo, that's not what our Mishnah is talking about. De kanafil hetera lego isura. That's where we're dealing with a case that's exactly opposite. We've got the nesach in here, and now the barrel is okay. And if that's pouring into here, then the okay is being nullified by the yayin nesach. Right? So he holds that because of the significant amount of the quantity of the yayin nesach, it will nullify. When our Mishnah says that it's going to, that the prohibited is going to nullify this, it's because you're pouring the okay into the yayin nesach. Okay, that's how he interprets our Mishnah.
What kind of quantity are we talking about?
That is a great question.
Because it's batal b'shishim, batal b'meya, batal b'... Yeah, because the Mishnah holds.
I'm going to suggest that he holds that it's going to be. I can't say it's a no saying Talmud if it's the same item.
Is it just going against the Mishnah about a minute amount? Also, the Isser culture like is. It's Rashi.
Bottle. No, it's not Asur Mela. Nenu. I don't know that he gives a share. Let's see if he. I don't know. I'm not sure what the share would be. It might be 1-60. I don't know. One second. Heter mevatel so iser berov. But he says tzarich lo b'shishim. It seems like the Rishonim are saying 1-60.
Right.
Okay. So that's what we're going to suggest. That it's still, he holds it still has to be that way, right? But that's not the case if you're pouring from the okay into the nesach.
Right. There's no right.
Right. Then it's b'mashu because that's what the Mishnah is talking about, right?
Even small size.
Because it just each one. What's going to happen is that as the okay hits the yayin nesach, even if you've got large quantities of okay, the yayin nesach is mevatel that which is okay, and now it all becomes prohibited. And then you keep pouring in. You never get to a bittul. You never get to a moment where you've got more okay than prohibited, right? We don't. There's a concept called choser v'neor. Choser v'neor is something that gets nullified can be reawakened and permit if ultimately you get enough permissible item in there. Right. He says that's not the case. Once you start pouring it in, each drop becomes prohibited, and then subsequently it can't nullify anything in the future.
But even still, like Batal B'Shishim is only B'Shoyge, right? We're not talking about a guy who...
You should not do this b'mezid.
Right.
Correct. You don't do this on purpose. Now, Toshma, come and listen. Yayin b'mayim, how are you going to understand our Mishnah? Mishnah says, if wine falls into water, b'nosein tam, right? Then it has to give a flavor. So now, my lav de kanafil chamra de isura lemaya de hetera. Aren't we talking about a circumstance where the wine is what's prohibited and it falls into the water that's permitted, and then this is the case of nesach into okay, and you said there we say that is the case of our Mishnah, and we're going to say that that's where it is no saying tam, right? And you're saying it doesn't matter; it's always going to nullify. So lo de kanafel chamra de hetera lemaya de isura. No. We're talking about where we're talking about the wine is permitted and the water is prohibited. That's the case. And then we're going to say, okay, since it's water and wine, then it's going to go by no saying tam. If it's wine and wine, it's going to be aser b'mashu. It's going to continuously null. Right? If I pour enough water into this wine, eventually it will get nullified. Right. That's the point, right? But if I pour enough wine into this wine, it won't ever get nullified. Right. That's the point of our Mishnah. Okay? So he says the Mishnah is always pouring okay into nesach. Umideresha b'maya de isura. Now, what you just said is if the beginning part of the Mishnah is where the water is prohibited, so therefore seifa nami b'maya de isura, right? So if the beginning part is where we're talking about yayin b'mayim, right? The wine goes into the water and water goes into the wine, right? Water goes into the wine. So in the first case, the water is the prohibited item, right? And it's being poured into the permitted wine, it's going to become nullified. So seifa nami b'maya de isura. So then the end case also should be where the water is the prohibited item. V'ketani seifa, and then the end says mayim b'yayin. If the water goes poured into the wine, b'nosein tam, it's going to be nullified if it gives a flavor, which means that we're talking about the prohibited item. Again, so now we're back. He's saying, no, I'm proving that we are talking about prohibited item being poured into the permitted item. And that is, it has to be b'nosein tam. It has to give a flavor.
Water doesn't give a flavor, though.
Water ruins a flavor.
Right.
It dilutes.
The dilution is considered tam.
Yes, correct.
Fine.
Amar Rav Dimi. So Rav Dimi says, no. Kula masnisin, the way that Rav Dimi understands this Mishnah is hetera legav isura. All of the cases are where the permissible is being poured into the prohibited, right? V'reisha the kanafa chamra hetera lemayad isura. The first case is wine that's permissible falling into water that's prohibited. Seifa de kanafa mayad hetera lechamra isura. And then the next case is where the water, which is permitted, falls into the wine that's prohibited, right? In other words, your presumption is that there's got to be some case where there's a prohibited item falling into permitted item because I've got water into wine. So either the water is permitted or the water is prohibited. Well, if the water is the prohibited item, then you told me that that's permitted falling into prohibited. Well, then when you flip the case and now wine goes into water, isn't permitted going into prohibited? He says, no. All the cases, no matter what you're pouring into what, the point of the Mishnah is it doesn't matter what's going into what. As long as the okay is going into the nesach, it's prohibited. And as long as the prohibited is going into the permitted, it's going to be batal. That's the point of our Mishnah. Okay? So that's how Rabbi Yochanan learns it. This, you can pour it all day long, and it's going to be fine. That's how Rabbi Yochanan learns. Okay? That's how Rav Dimi learns Rabbi Yochanan. Now, Ki also Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, he came and he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Hama'ara yayin nesach mitzirtzur koton lebor. He says, I'm going to qualify that. This yayin nesach can't be from the barrel. It has to be from a small container. Because then you're pouring a little bit of wine at a time, right? If you pour from a small container into the large container, then you're going to nullify it a little bit at a time. If you're pouring yayin nesach from a small container labor into the cistern, afilu kol yom kulo, and you do that all day. So the quantity of wine, you're going to still get a lot of wine. But you're doing one little bottle at a time, little bits at a time, rishon bottle, then it's nullified. V'dav ketzirtzur koton, it has to be a small container. Delo nofish amudei. That the flow of it is not that significant. Avachavis, but if, according to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef's version, if you poured a whole barrel, so then the nofish amudei low, you're pouring so much at once, right, then you will have a problem, right? So that's the difference between Rav Dimi and Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef is, according to Rabbi Yochanan, how much gets poured in at once. Even if you've got a large amount poured in at once, then it could create a problem.
Is considered part of the quantity. So technically, bato b'shishim, like you could sit there and add a little bit, like milk into meat.
That's correct. The finalized product, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that's exactly the point. The finalized product becomes nullified and part of the permitted total.
That's so interesting.
That's correct. That's how Rabbi Yochanan is learning. Ki also Rabin, to get more complicated, Rabin comes from Eretz Yisrael, and he says on Rabbi Yochanan, he says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Yayin nesech shenafol labor, if I've got yayin nesech that goes into a pit, v'nafol sham kiton shel mayim. Now, to introduce, Rabin understands Rabbi Yochanan as understanding our Mishnah in the simplest way. He agrees. A little bit of yayin nesech is going to ruin the whole thing. So if this case that Rav Dimi said and Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef said, it made Rabbi Yochanan's understanding of the Mishnah a little bit difficult. Rav Rabin understands the Mishnah as simple, right? If I'm going to take yayin nesech and I'm going to pour it right into this container, that's going to ruin it. Okay, that we're back to. Okay, that's in Rabin's understanding. However, according to him, right, if you've got yayin nesech, right, that's falling into the pit, v'nafal sham kiton shel mayim, and water fell in here also, right? So now I've got some water that goes in here too. Okay, nafal sham kiton shel mayim. Roin es haheter ki'ilu eino. V'ashar mayim rabin alav mevatnuso. We take a look at the permissible wine as though it's not there. And what we do is we allow the water to nullify the yayin nesech. Right. Remember that we said that when it comes to wine into wine, the slightest amount is going to nullify.
Right.
But wine into water, taste is going to make a difference. Right. So here's what we have. We have enough water to nullify this wine. The thing is, we've got this whole vat of permissible wine here. Theoretically, if I pour prohibited wine into this permissible vat, then this whole vat now becomes prohibited wine. And if I pour a little bit of water into this prohibited wine, it's not going to do anything. However, I have enough water to nullify this. Rabbi Yochanan's leniency is, I don't care about how much permissible wine is here. I'm going to look at this water and this prohibited wine. If this water can nullify this permissible wine, then it's okay. The whole thing is okay. This water nullifies this. This is going to cancel this. And this is irrelevant.
And you have to pour it the exact same thing.
Oh, well, when you pour it is going to be a subject of machlokas. So, right? Never simple.
Right. Because if you pour it first, it becomes yayin nesek. So.
Okay, so now. Ki also Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Yochanan, when Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda came from Eretz Yisrael, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Lo shanu ela shenafal kiton shamayim tchil, the water's got to fall in first. Okay, this is where, right? He says the water's got to go in here first. So now you've got a mixture of permissible wine plus water that has the capacity of nullifying this wine. Then, because the water's already in there, when the wine falls in, the water activates and takes care of the wine, and the permissible wine that's in here never mixes with the prohibited wine,
right?
Because the water took care of it. So the water has to be first.
According to that shita, the water's not bottled.
That's correct. So this is now a mixture of wine and water, right?
And the water's not.
And the water's permissible, and the wine is permissible, but the water's not bottled. So when the wine falls in, the water activates and cancels out the wine. But the water, according to Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, the water's got to be in there already, right? According to him, if the wine fell in first, then this whole thing is going to be prohibited. And then you pour in water afterwards, there's nothing that is going to help. If the water doesn't fall in first, matzah minas mino, then the prohibited wine is going to prohibit the entire vat of permitted wine, v'neur, and the whole thing becomes one activated, prohibited vat of wine now. And so you're going to pour the water in after the fact, and it's not going to help you.
Right.
Okay, that's how Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda understands this. Now, some people said that Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda actually made a statement when he was talking about the Mishnah. He didn't come and say, you know what Rabbi Yochanan says? He started with the Mishnah, and he said, the Mishnah says, yayin beyayin kol shehu. Wine goes into wine, it's going to nullify in the slightest amount, which means that it's not going to be nullified in the slightest amount. It's going to prohibit. And so the whole thing will be prohibited. Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda qualifies that. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says that. You know what Rabbi Yochanan said about that? Lo shano ela shelo nafal sham kitum shemayim. That's as long as there was no water in the vat in the first place. Aval nafal sham kitum shemayim. But if you did have water in the vat first, roen esa heter ki'ilu eino, we're going to look at the permissible wine as though it doesn't exist. Vashar mayim rabin alav mevatlin also, and the rest of the water that is in there is going to nullify the yayin nesech that you just poured in, and you're okay.
Was Rav Dimi the one who said that two things of the same thing? That's what it was, right? Two of the same species.
He says that even the wine that falls in, even if it's going to be small amounts, it's not going to prohibit it b'mashahu, right? He says it's not b'mashahu. Right. So he's Rav Dimi and Rav.
But it's going back to the same species thing, right? What we talked about, because they're both coming from. They're both
but don't you bring Rav Dimi, and Rav Dimi gets things confusing because he doesn't understand that Rabbi Yochanan is holding b'mashahu is prohibited, right? So this is the traditional way of understanding, right? Rav Dimi had a different way. Rav Dimi says no, you can pour little bits of wine. And then there was an argument about how much wine in, but they bottom line, disagree with the basic understanding of our Mishnah, right? Our Mishnah seems to say the smallest amount. They say, no, it's not true. Smallest amount doesn't prohibit. Min b'mino is not nullified in the smallest amount. It's only if you have larger quantities of prohibited, where you're pouring permitted, that's where it's nullifying, right? Ma'ika bein l'demasni lo amasnisin bein l'demasni lo aderabin. What is the difference between whether you are learning the statement of Rabbi Yochanan according to Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yehuda on the Mishnah, or you're learning it according to Rabin, where the issue, as we said, is whether the water is going to nullify the yayin nesach or not? Man demasni la amasnisin lo boy tchila. If you learn this statement from the Mishnah, then the water doesn't have to come in first, right? It doesn't matter because the way the Mishnah doesn't specify. The Mishnah says if wine into wine is prohibited, he says, yeah, but then if you pour some water in afterwards, the water is going to nullify the prohibited wine. And so he says even the water afterwards is okay. But according to the opinion that Rav Shmuel says the name of Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda is going on Rabin, he says, by tchila, you need to put the water first. The water has to be there already. Okay? That's the issue. Itmar. Let's go back over this point. Yayin nesach shenafal labor. If I've got wine that's yayin nesach that falls into my pit of permissible wine, okay? So this is my yayin nesach falls into my okay wine, okay? V'nafal sham kiton shamayim, and now my water falls in as well. So, Amar Chizkiah says, Higdilo be'isr, isr higdilo be'isr, isr higdilo. Then it's usr. If the increase in the volume, the last thing to fall in, is the prohibited, so then the whole vat is prohibited. The whole thing is prohibited. Okay? And higdilo beheter, if the last thing that falls in is the permissible wine, so then it's mutter. Then it's going to be fine. Right? Then it's going to be fine. Because
you think that if you put the wine that's not kosher in first, and then the permissible wine with things.
So let's talk about quantities. The quantities, it's critical to talk about quantities, right? What happens is, okay, you've got wine here, okay, permissible, right? Let's say this is the permissible, okay, and you're going to pour water into it. You pour enough water in to nullify this wine, okay. Now, this is now nullified wine. Then you take your yayin nesach and you add prohibited into it. Now, because this is wine, he says, this wine connects to this wine, and now the wine overpowers the water. He says that's where it becomes prohibited. Okay, because your added prohibited item, the prohibited item has now overpowered the water, and that's what makes it prohibited. However, if you reverse it, and you make it that this is the prohibited item, and you poured the water in and nullified the prohibited, and then you pour more permitted in at the end, well, then it's fine. Because this is already permitted, and you're just pouring more permitted in. That's why it's okay. So that's where Chizkiah says, right? Because the last thing you pour in makes the difference whether you're bringing this container to have something that's prohibited over overpower the water, or something that's permitted overpowers the water. But either way, the water already nullified what was in the container, so therefore yayin nesach is gone. So you put more permitted, it's certainly fine. If, however, the wine was permitted and you overpowered it with water, well, now you've got overpowered wine. But now it becomes reactivated by the prohibited, and that's prohibited.
And it really doesn't matter what starts in these containers because the water nullified it. So it's really
that's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah le Rabbi Zera. I'm sorry. Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah le Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zera. I'm sorry, was there a chachamim here? Oh, sorry, deal beheter mutter. Oh, sorry, Rabbi Yochanan. Yeah, sorry, I skipped Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Rabbi Yochanan will tell you, afilu higdiber iser mutter. It doesn't matter, right? According to Rabbi Yochanan, of course, he says if you add the yayin nesach last, it doesn't matter because the water is going to be able to nullify, even if it's in the mixture already. The water is going to nullify this too. Right? We look at the permissible wine that's in here as though it doesn't exist, and the water is going to nullify it either way.
Right, because he goes with us as long as you pour the water first.
That's correct. So it does not matter. So therefore, as Rabbi Yochanan says, it doesn't matter whichever one comes last. It's going to be fine. Amali Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. Okay, so Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zera, you know what this sounds an awful like? It sounds an awful like our slightly annoying but keeps popping back up case of dropping leavened agents into dough case. Right? And that is Lema Chizkiya Rabbi Yochanan beblukta Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbanan. Let's say that this argument between Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan is the same argument as between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan Kemiflagi. Remember the case. Ditnan, we learned in a Mishnah. Se'ur shel chulin, if I've got a leavening agent, got a bunch of dough, right? Got dough right here. And I've got a leavening agent that is okay. It's chulin. We say that it is not... it has no prohibited items to it. And then I've got a leavening agent that is truma, right? And because of its truma, and I'm no Kohen, I'm not going to be able to eat it. And so what happens is they're going to fall into this dough and they're going to cause it to rise. Okay, that's their leavening. They didn't use yeast or whatever. It was more like the sourdough type thing. And so the leavening agents fall in, right? So I've got se'ur shechulin v'shel truma shenaflu l'toch ha'isa. And lo bezekdei lachmetz v'lo bezekdei lachmetz. I don't have enough leavening agent in either side independently to cause this dough to rise. I need quantity. I need the prohibited item and the permitted item together to cause the dough to rise. V'chamtzu, v'nitzrafu v'chamtzu. They combine together and they make the dough rise. Okay? Rabbi Eliezer says, achar achron ani ba. I go by which one fell in last. That's how I look, right? Whatever fell in last. V'chachamim omrim, the chacham disagree. Bein shenafal aser b'tchil bein basof. Eino oser ad sheyehei bo kedei lachmitz. The prohibited item can't, in a quantity, combine together with another permitted item and make the dough prohibited, because alone the prohibited item wouldn't have been able to make it rise. So you can't blame the rising dough on the prohibited item. So it doesn't matter which one fell in first. That's how the chachamim learn it. So therefore, it sounds very much on the surface like Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan's argument, where Chizkiya says, we take a look at whichever wine fell in last, and Rabbi Yochanan says, it doesn't matter which one fell in last, it's always permissible. Right. So that's where on the surface, it's similar, right? Because the halachas are similar. We know something's falling into something. We've got prohibited, we've got permitted, right? There's an argument whether it matters which one fell in last. Sounds very similar. But the two arguments are completely not similar. Abai says, Lo shanu ela shekodem v'silek es ha'isser. First of all, remember, when it comes to the dough, the argument doesn't exist unless they removed the first leavening agent. Meaning, you don't have, it's not a bittul question. Right. The question of the wine is for sure a bittul question. It's a bittul question. It's a nullification. Because whatever falls in is still there. So the question is, has whatever's fallen in been nullified or has it not been nullified? That's the question by the wine. In this case, it's not a nullification question. How do I know? Because you've removed the leavening agent. Right. You get the leavening agent, it activates the dough, and then you take it out.
And even if you had 1,000,000 times more of the truma, as long as there was enough of it to...
That is correct. And the reason why we normally say that when it comes to truma, there's a concept of batel in meya. It's 100 to 1 is nullified. Right. Not when it comes to leavening agents, because we said that when it's going to make a significant change to it's like no Saint Tom, right? And so therefore it doesn't matter if you have 100 to 1, if it's going to be no Saint Tom, it's going to be significantly causing the dough to rise. It's irrelevant the volumes either. Now, however, if the leavening agent remained in there, so then then everyone would agree it's still prohibited. So that's not the issue. So Chizkiah Damar Kaman, if this argument says, let's say they both fall in, they're both still in there. Everyone agrees it's prohibited. Now, how's Chizkiah going to understand that? So, because if, according to Chizkiah, he says, look, if Chizkiah, right, Chizkiah is not going to be able to understand this argument because, according to Chizkiah, first of all, if the item doesn't get removed, right, it's always going to be prohibited. Well, he says, no, because if the permitted item fell in last, it's going to be permitted. Right. So there's no way for Chizkiah to understand how that works, right? And according to the according to the Chacham, everyone agrees it's right. Everyone agrees it's and he says it would be permitted if the permitted one fell in last. So
the Rabbanim said as long as whichever one fell in last, right? The Rabbanim said that. But
that's only if it was taken out. Only if it was taken out. If it wasn't taken out, they would agree it's prohibited. And that's a problem because Chizkiah doesn't say that. Chizkiah says the wine is still in there, and he says if the permissible one fell in last, it should be permitted. It should be permitted, right? With the wine, no wine is getting taken out, so therefore it doesn't hold like Chizkiah. Ella hacha beroen kemifligi. The answer is the dough case is our old argument. If we remember what we said before, that is v'zev v'zeh goreim argument. Zev v'zeh goreim, if you remember, is where I have two causes, a permissible cause and a prohibited cause. Does the prohibited cause combine with the permitted cause to cause the prohibition, right? There, they were not arguing about bittul. Everyone would agree if there's still prohibited item in there, it's still not nullified and it exists and it's a problem. That's not their issue. Their issue is if I came and I caused it to leaven and this one caused it to leaven, the item is already removed, so there's no bittul issue. The item is already removed. But the leavening was caused by two different things, right? Do I consider the prohibited item significant enough when two items cause it, right? We call that zev v'zeh goreim. Two causes, a prohibited cause and a permitted cause. Do I consider the prohibited cause relevant? That was the argument there.
I'm so sorry. But according to this, Rabbi Elazar says, acharon ani bo. So that means as long, it doesn't say anything about...
Yes, but you can't, but then we said that is only when we took the prohibited item out.
Okay.
Otherwise, everyone says prohibited. As we said, that's everyone suggests prohibited. Rabbi Eliezer is going to say it's prohibited because you didn't take it out. He would say by the wine, it would be prohibited. You didn't take it out. So, elahacha beroin kamiflagi. Here, we're dealing with roin. This wine issue is whether we ignore the initial permitted substance. That's the argument. Lechizkiah leis le roin. Chizkiah, he takes a look and he says, look, I've got this vat of permissible wine, and I'm going to pour this water in, okay? And so what have I got, right? I've got nullified wine here. So now, but it's mixed with water. I've got a nullified mixture of wine, water. Now I'm going to pour more wine in, and as a result, there was enough wine that's prohibited to nullify the water. I don't say, hey, the water that's already here is now nullified, doesn't exist anymore. We don't say that. Right. That's roin, and we don't say that. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. He says, once the wine is in, the permissible wine is here, ignore it. It doesn't matter anymore. It's irrelevant, and so therefore the water is going to nullify whatever else you're going to pour in. Rabbi Yochanan is going to hold of roin. Okay, so that means that the argument, there's two completely different arguments. One is called zev v'zeh goreim, right, where I've got a prohibited cause and permitted cause. That's by dough. When it comes to pouring wine into the water, the question is, once something is mixed in and nullified already, are we able to take that wine and just say, ignore it, and just look at the water? Or Rabbi Yochanan says, sure, I can. Just look, I've got this in here and I've got water in here. This water already nullified the wine. Now the water is going to nullify this. We don't combine the two things together, right? So that's the concept. Now, we're going to question whether Rabbi Yochanan holds of this concept of roin, and we're going to go like this. Mi is le Rabbi Yochanan roin. So, does Rabbi Yochanan hold of this concept of roin? Okay, we're going to have a couple of cups of wine. Okay, and I'm going to explain it according to what seems like Rashi first, despite the fact that it comes up with a little bit of novelty and it's subject to argument and whatever. But let's say like this: in the olden days, right, wine was very potent, so they would fill it up one quarter with wine, and then 3/4 with water.
3-to-1 ratio.
Okay, that's my 3-to-1 ratio.
3-part 1.
Okay,
1.
3-to-1. Okay, so this is what I've got. I've got two cups, right? And this is how I've done. Now, the only thing is, I've got a secondary problem. Okay, that is that this wine is nesach, and this wine is okay, right? So, well, actually, we're going to make it truma. We're not going to make it nesach. But that's okay. Same idea, concept, right? Truma. Okay, this wine is truma, that wine is okay. Now, here's what happens. So this is the question that Rav Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan. Boy mini Rav Asi Rabbi Yochanan. He asked Rabbi Yochanan the question. Shnei kosos, I've got 2 cups. Echad shel chulin ve'echad shel truma. One has chulin wine, and it's okay to drink. One has truma wine, and unless you're a Kohen, you can't drink that. So umazgon, and you mixed it with water. Okay, so you've got 3 parts water, 1 part wine. Ve'irvon zebazeh. Then you take them, the cups, and you pour it all together into one container. Okay, so now what have I got? I've got 6 parts water, 1 part chulin, and 1 part truma. Okay, now. Okay, 6 parts water, according to Rashi, is enough to nullify the wine. This is where we say, what's no saint tam by wine? It's not 60-to-1. Wine can be damaged by 6 parts water. That's the Rashi Shita. Now, I'm going to mention that because not everyone agrees with that. According to others, the ratios have to be slightly different here. In order for the ratio, they still say it needs to be 60-to-1. So they say, the cups are not equal. This is a 3-to-1 ratio. This is a 19 parts to 57 parts ratio. Okay? If I've got a 19 parts to 57 parts ratio, right? Sorry, the other way around, right? 57 parts water, 19 parts, right? If I've got 57 parts water, 19 parts chulin. Sorry, that's the 19 parts chulin.
It's all about nullifying the chulin?
I'm trying to nullify the truma. So I need 60-to-1. So now if I've got 3 parts water and 1 part truma, so then by connecting all these together, I get a 60 parts water and 1 part truma. That's going to nullify 60-to-1.
I think it says 2 cups of wine.
Yes.
2 cups of
Who
wine.
says they have to be equal?
1 truma.
Yes.
One
chulin, that's right. So before we explained according to Rashi, this is the simple way, right? It's 3-3, and therefore nullification is 6-to-1.
Right.
So if I pour together, I've got 6 parts water, 1 part chulin, 1 part truma. What we're suggesting is, if you hold roin, right? If you hold roin, which we suggest Rabbi Yochanan does hold, then we don't worry about the chulin. It's got 6 parts water. Ignore the permissible one, and the 6 parts water is going to nullify the 1 part truma. Ignore the permissible. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says to do. Therefore, 6-to-1 nullified, or according to other Mefarshim, 60-to-1, and we'll nullify it, no problem. Okay? So that's how Rabbi Yochanan should answer it. Rabbi Yochanan should answer, I mixed these 2 cups together. I've got plenty of water to nullify the truma. And so now it should be okay. Okay, so that's what we're suggesting. And what did Rabbi Yochanan answer though? Right? What's the expected answer? Rabbi Yochanan should say, permissible, right? But what did Rabbi Yochanan say? He says, Shnei kosos echad shel chulin ve'echad shel truma mazgan ve'irvan zebazeh. He mixes them together. Ma'u what's the halacha? Ve'lo pashat lei. And he didn't have an answer. Well, what do you mean he doesn't have an answer? Rabbi Yochanan's own opinion is that's permissible. So the answer is, me'kara lo pashat lei. At the beginning, Rabbi Yochanan wasn't sure what the answer was. Then later on in his career, he came to a conclusion of Asof, Pashat lay. At the end, he answered it. Itmar Nami, as we say later on, that it was also stated, Amar Ravami, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that Ravami said the name Rabbi Yochanan, Vamri La Amar Ravasi, some say it was Ravasi in the name Rabbi Yochanan, that he asked him again the question later. Beis Kosos Echad Shel Chulin Vechad Shel Truma, 2 cups, 1 Chulin, 1 Truma, same case. Umazgan Virzvan Zebazeh, and he dilutes them and he mixes them together. Roen Es Aheter Ki Ilu Eno, we look at the Chulin wine, it does not exist. And therefore, it's not a 3-to-1 ratio, it is a 6-to-1 ratio of water to wine. So the water nullifies the wine, and that's that. Okay, so that's consistency with Rabbi Yochanan. At the beginning, he wasn't sure which way he would hold. At the end, that's how he holds. Okay, that's Rabbi Yochanan. Finished with that issue. Let's move on to the next concept. Zehaklal, if you're dizzy, I get it, I understand. Zehaklal, here's the rule. Min b'mino b'mashahu, if you've got the same type, the smallest amount. Shalo b'mino b'nosein tam, if it's not the same type, it has to give flavor. Rav Shmuel, the Amri Tavayu, both Rav and Shmuel, they both say, Kol isurin shebatorah b'minon b'mashu v'lo shebinon b'nosein tam. They sold, Rav and Shmuel say, this is a rule all through the Torah. Anytime you have a prohibited item and a permissible item, if they're the same type, they don't nullify. And if they are different types, now we're talking about mixtures, right? To be very clear that we're talking about mixtures, like liquids, that's mixtures. For Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, Damri Tarvayu, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they disagree. Kol isurin shebatorah bein b'minon, bein shelo b'minon b'nosein tam. Right? This is Rabbi Yochanan, we said before. It doesn't matter, it's always about, so therefore that answers the question, what was his amount that he says in the Mishnah? The answer is always about taste, according to this opinion. Right? It's always about taste. Except chutz mitevel v'yayin nesach. Except when it comes to tevel and yayin nesach. Tevel and yayin nesach. Tevel is Truma and Meiser had not been specifically. Mainly, Truma is the big one. Truma from the wheat, and Yayin Nesach. Those are not able to be nullified. B'minon b'mashu, they are even the smallest amount. The whole thing becomes prohibited. V'shelo b'minon, and if it's not the same type, b'nosein tam, then it has to give flavor. Okay, so now v'zeh klal. So now, how are they going to understand our Mishnah? The Mishnah talks about Yayin Nesach. And the Yayin Nesach, it says, in the smallest quantity, it's going to be prohibited. So that's fine. Everyone agrees, right? If you hold that all mitzvahs are like this, and you hold Yayin Nesach and Tevel is like this, it's okay. Yayin Nesach is like this. It's a problem. If you put the smallest amount of Yayin Nesach into a vat of permissible wine, it's going to be, the whole thing is going to be prohibited. That's right. But Zakal Asuye Tevel. So according to them, when the Mishnah says, this is the rule, let's include, what are they including? So according to Rav and Shmuel, they're including everything, all mitzvahs in the whole Torah. That's the rule. According to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, when they say this is the rule, they're only adding tevel. They're only adding one more thing. Only tevel follows that rule. Tanya kavasi de Rav Shmuel, Tanya kavasi de Rabbi Yochanan. There's a brisa that supports Rav and Shmuel's opinion, and a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish's opinion. Tanya kavasi de Rav Shmuel. How do we support Rav and Shmuel? Kol isurin shebatorah b'minon b'mashu shelo b'minon b'nosein tam. Very simple, right? Well, every prohibition in the Torah, if it's the same quantity, it's not nullified. If it's same item, it's not nullified. And if it's not the same item, so then it has to give flavor. Tanya Kavasi Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, there's another opinion that agrees with Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Kol Yisurin Shebatorah Bein Beninon Bein Shelo B'minon Nosein Tam. Every prohibition in the Torah, it doesn't matter whether it's the same type or whether it's a different type, it has to give a flavor. Chutz mitevel v'yayin nesach. But the exception to the rule is tevel and yayin nesach. We learned psukim, what we had learned earlier in the Masechta. B'mashu, right? B'minon b'mashu, if they are of the same type, then even the smallest amount. Shelo b'minon b'nosein tam, and if it's not the same type, it has to give a flavor.
So neither of them go like the Mishnah.
All of them go like the Mishnah. The Mishnah talks about yayin nesach.
Right.
Everyone agrees that's the rule by yayin nesach.
The Mishnah said, as long as it was, it could be batal, as long as you're, right? The Mishnah says, b'mashu, it's prohibited. All right.
Right?
Right. Sorry, I'm thinking Rav Dimi.
Right, Rav Dimi, right, I told you. Rav Dimi, it does, the way he understands the Mishnah is very unique, right? We have to explain, remember, he's very unique. So I understand yayin nesach. Why is it different and it's stricter than other prohibition mixtures? Because it's idol worship, very serious, right? So therefore, we're going to take it more stringently. Ela tevel my taima. Why is tevel the second one? All the prohibitions in the Torah, the not untithed produce is the one that you're going to pick. So the answer is, because kehetero kachi suro. Because the way that you permit untithed produce is by taking the smallest amount out of it and saying this is truma. The Torah doesn't tell you how much truma. You could have huge quantities of wheat and take this much out, and that's truma. Therefore, when it becomes prohibited, the smallest amount is also going to make it prohibited. Right? Damar Shmuel. Shmuel says, Chita achas poteres esakri. One kernel of wheat can take care of the entire pile of wheat that you have. So, and we also have Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a brisa that supports this as well. But me amru tevel oser b'kol shehu b'mino. When do we say that tevel nullifies in the smallest quantity? That is when it's the same type, wheat and wheat. Shalo b'mino, if it's not the same type but no same tam, then it has to be enough to give flavor. So, let's just try it a little bit more because today's daf is ayin daled. So Mishnah says, Elu asurin v'osrin b'kol shehu. Now, we're going to talk, we've been talking about all this time, we've been talking about liquid mixtures.
Right.
Now let's talk about dry mixtures. Okay, dry mixtures they mix together, but they're not like one. It doesn't become one entity. So these items are prohibited, and they cause a prohibition in a mixture. It doesn't matter the amounts, right? It doesn't matter what the ratio is. Yayin nesach. If you've got barrels, now we're not talking about the liquid yayin nesach. I've got barrels of yayin nesach. I've got barrels of prohibited wine mixing together with other barrels of permissible wine. I've got avodos kochavim. I've got an idol, and somebody worshipped this statue, but there are a bunch of other statues that nobody's worshipped. They all get mixed together. The oros lebuvin. If I've got skins that have the hearts cut out of them, right? What happens is that the idol worshippers, as part of their service, had a thing that they would do, that they would cut a hole in a live animal and remove the heart. So when they would do that, you'd have a hole in the skin, and you could know these are idolatrous. These are animals used for idolatry. So if you've got those skins, and I guess they got cut up, and therefore now you can't tell which one is which, right? So that is going to be, those are never nullified. The shor haniskal, if I've got the remains, meat that comes from an ox that killed a person, for example, right? And the ox got stoned, and so now it becomes prohibited for benefit. And I've got a steak that comes from that ox, mixes up with other steaks. It is not nullified. The egla arufa, if I've got a calf, was in last week's parsha, right? Where the elders from the city find a dead body, and they don't know which city it's close. They don't know who's responsible for it. So whichever city is closest, they bring a calf and they make a procedure, and the calf that is killed in that procedure is prohibited to get any benefit from it. So if somebody makes lamb chops or calf chops, whatever it is, veal chops out of it, right? Then and mixes up with other veal chops, all of them are prohibited. Vetsipure mitzora, the birds of a mitzora, of somebody who has tzaras. Somebody has tzaras, part of his sacrifices in order to become purified again, he has to take two birds. One of them gets slaughtered, the blood gets mixed with water, and then they take the second bird and they dip it into the blood and water of the first one and sprinkle that, and then they turn that bird loose. That bird goes free. While the birds are in service, they're both prohibited from getting any benefit out of. If somebody mixes up those birds with bird meat, poultry from other birds, then the whole thing is prohibited, can't be nullified. Our nazir, the hair that comes when the nazir shaves his head to purify and reset himself, that hair is also prohibited. Upeter chamor, also firstborn male donkeys. Firstborn male donkeys have to be exchanged, right, in order for you to keep them, or they have to be killed. That donkey, according to this opinion, is prohibited even while it's still alive.
Which is what they did a couple years ago here in Toronto.
Yes, you're right, and they always make a big thing about it, right? Right. Ubasar bechalav, and if I've got meat and milk mixed together, can't get any benefit out of it. If I mix this non-kosher meat and milk mixture to get a mixture with other milk, with other meat that is kosher, can't eat any of it, can't get any benefit out of any of it. Useir hamishtalayach, also the goat that gets sent away on Yom Kippur is prohibited from getting any benefit out of. V'chulin shenishchatu ba'azara, and also if I have chulin, which is non-sacrificial meat that gets slaughtered in the Beis Hamikdash, you're not allowed to sacrifice anything non-sacrificial in the Beis Hamikdash. And so if you do slaughter an animal that becomes prohibited from benefit, can't get mixed up with anything else. Harei elu asurin, so they are prohibited, v'asurin b'kol shu, and they are prohibited in any amounts. They can never be nullified. We're going to take a break there.